I used to buy science fiction magazines from my local news agency in suburban Western Australia, particularly Analog. And I came across an advertisement for the L. Ron Hubbard Writers of the Future contest there. And at the time I was a budding writer and illustrator. I would have first seen this about the age of 15 or 16. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity to send some work somewhere. I really had nowhere else to send my work. And I did, and I got a favourable response. I didn't succeed the first two goes, but on the third shot, got in. I think they were pencil and watercolour drawings, subjects that I'd obviously been practising a little bit, robots and dinosaurs and crashed spaceships. And I got a response, a little handwritten note from Frank Kelly-Freas, which was amazing. That was maybe the first contact I'd had with another artist, let alone an artist of that calibre, and so it was really exciting. It was clear that people were really looking closely at what was being submitted. It encouraged me to submit a second time, and again there was a favourable response. Didn't win, but I think I was a quarter-finalist. And simultaneously I'd also been partly successful as a writer because I really didn't know what my strength was, writing or illustration. I loved both of those things. And that's another thing that attracted me to the contest, is that it had the twin streams. It seemed to treat each equally, which was very unusual. So it was very nice to be able to submit work to both each time, almost doubling my bet. And to finally succeed on the illustration front was just a real massive thrill. The illustration I did for the anthology was for a story called Winter Night with Kittens by Sam Wilson. Having won, I was given this assignment. It was maybe my first story illustration assignment ever. It was like a first commission with very clear specifications, and I approached it, with great reverence. And I thought it was a fantastic story. Very restrained and subtle, very difficult to illustrate because it did not have a obvious science fiction motif. He time travelled without a device. And I actually found that a really good challenge. I was able to create some kind of suspense in the illustration, everything I guess I'd learned up to that point with my own study of science fiction illustration. When I got the call that I'd won the contest, I think it took such a long time to register. Probably the first time I'd ever had an international telephone call in my life. A rare sounding American accent, informing me that I'd won. And I think I just said, "Oh, really?" And she was like, "Aren't you excited?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I got to think about this for a little bit." I was really quite shocked by the whole thing. And then she proceeded to explain that it involved, the trip and the workshop. I think I was 17 or 18, my first big trip abroad to such a foreign place as the United States. What an alien culture that was. And meeting these very, established, such accomplished writers and artists, far more senior than myself, obviously, and in some ways a little bit intimidating, but super friendly. And that was one thing that I guess endeared me, or I guess cemented my admiration for science fiction and fantasy community, was that sense of no sense of competitiveness, no sense of selfish withholding of professional tips. It was extremely generous, and people were just really nice. So that was the first thing, was how wonderfully nice people were. Secondly, I guess just to see people who were so dedicated, particularly to a form of literature and art that I'd previously been led to believe in my mainstream environment as being quite obscure. I was actually part of a broader community by having my own idiosyncratic and personal interests, which were totally accepted and embraced. The Illustrators of the Future workshop involved a weekend, first of all meeting professional practicing illustrators, which was quite exciting, and it was a fairly informal, casual discussion, both between ourselves as fellow contestants and the practicing illustrators. And of course there is always this thing which is inspiration and talent and that strange place where ideas come from, but that by itself is nothing unless you have the tools and devices and the sheer dedication to kind of bring it into being and communicate to an audience, which is something that's often forgotten, especially among young artists, believing that art is about self-expression. Well, it's not. It's about communicating to another person. I think the first time I saw my illustration published in the Writers of the Future anthology was very exciting. To actually see my work in a real book, and I memorised the page number, so it was easy to look up. It was great to just have something that I could show my friends and family. So take back and go, look, I'm published in an actual book. That germ of confidence way back then has allowed me to approach these other things with confidence. And that is almost like a key ingredient to being a successful artist, is believing that you can do stuff. And once you get that out of the way, which is a huge hurdle, then you can get on with doing it. So I became inspired to illustrate science fiction short stories. And I estimate that I may have done about 150. The great thing about all of them was that it meant working on stories by so many different writers in a genre that is the weirdest possible genre. So you get double variety. It's one of the most challenging genres to be working in, because one day you'll get a story that's a funny story about time travel. The next day it's a very serious post-apocalyptic love story. Then it's something about monsters, very, kind of visual, something that's very pared down, very philosophical, hard science fiction, high fantasy, everything. And that was my training ground. More and more I was drawn to something that was an intersection of science fiction and fantasy, began to illustrate book covers in that area, eventually leading to picture books and particularly children's literature, which is now where I've made a name for myself doing picture books and other more substantial projects. I was able to apply a lot of my science fiction and fantasy skills to that genre and do work that was quite original, because not many other artists had come from my background into that environment. Winning an Oscar felt a little bit like a very similar experience to winning the L. Ron Hubbard Illustrators of the Future Award. I feel there's some responsibility, to give something back, because it was such a good thing for me and such a helpful thing for me that I would like other people to experience that. I'm in an ideal position to be a judge because I know what's at stake, on behalf of the new contestants that are emerging now. So I don't look for necessarily just the obvious qualities of a contestant's submission. I'm looking for some other kind of potential, particularly a conceptual approach to illustration, not just technical skill and those sort of things, but are they a good writer with pictures? And that's what a good illustrator is. They're a writer that uses pictures. L. Ron Hubbard's vision for the contest is, for a start, extremely generous, and also based on the realisation that great art doesn't just happen. It does have to be nurtured and encouraged. And it can be a difficult thing to pursue as an individual, particularly because your work is by nature isolated, intensively self-reflective, idiosyncratic, if it's any good. And I think there's some awareness in the contest of the need to have some centralised focus and bringing together of the disparate threads of imaginative people into a singular community, something that extends into the future as well. So not just about what's happening now, but about things that are going to happen, work that's going to be produced that we have no concept of. That's a very generous vision.